Jonathan, thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. And let me also add a note of gratitude here to the Chicago Humanities Festival and to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I can't think of two organizations which do more to promote research and studies and education in the arts and humanities than these two organizations. Before I begin my conversation with Jerome McDonnell and with you, I wanted to set the stage here quite literally by presenting some vignettes from my own experience. And what I'd like to do is talk about Afghanistan briefly, where I served 3 tours of duty, twice as a soldier, once as a diplomat, over a 5-year period of time in that country. Since our nation's intervention in Afghanistan in late 2001, our application of hard power has cost the United States taxpayers $550 billion in military operating cost. The price, by the way, of deploying 1 soldier or a Marine to Afghanistan for 1 year is about $1 million. At the height of the surge in 2011, we had 100,000 soldiers and Marines and other services in that country, and if you do the math, that adds up to about $100 billion per year. To date, there's been over 2,200 American soldiers killed in Afghanistan. There's been almost 20,000 who are wounded. And the estimated health care cost over the next 35 to 40 years of treating those who have been wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq together, that's going to cost us as a nation upwards of $1 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion. So that's the price of hard power. Now there's soft power, and all of you are familiar with that expression from Harvard professor Joe Nye's concept, which he described as the ability to willingly attract and co-opt as opposed to coerce. Soft power is about culture, it's about values, and smart, nuanced foreign policy. Its fount is the magnetic potential of the arts and humanities. So in Afghanistan, the application of soft power has been extraordinarily modest in terms of cost, but it's also been very high payoff when considering the results. 2 examples I'll quickly give you. First, archaeology and history. The Afghan people, as you know, have a very proud history, enriched over the ages by their nation's pivotal location as a geographic, a commercial, religious, and a cultural crossroads of Persia, Central Asia, and South Asia. But after decades of brutal political and ethnic warfare, marked by a Soviet occupation, by civil war, and by Taliban abusive rule, the relics of their past have been systematically destroyed. Their history has been expropriated by fanatics, and the Afghan sense of common identity has dangerously eroded. Now, one of the most valued members, then, of our embassy team when I had the honor of serving as the ambassador, leading 1,400 Americans from 18 different departments and agencies of our government, one of the most valued members was our embassy archaeologist, one of only 2 such experts that are assigned to any U.S. diplomatic mission around the world today. And among the other projects, she led the way in promoting the restoration of what's called the Old Citadel of Herat, Kala Iktiruddin in western Afghanistan, the gateway to Persia. The citadel was perhaps first built by Alexander the Great. It was leveled by the Mongols. It was rebuilt. It was destroyed by Tamerlane's forces and then made splendid by a Shah in the 15th century. It fell again into ruin in the conflicts of modern times. The Herat Citadel is the story of a once-in-a-proud Afghan people and hopefully a great future for that country. So please watch this very brief video clip in which Afghans talk about the renovation of their citadel.
Today, the Citadel of Herat has been completely renovated in a project lasting 5 years. The latest restoration involved hundreds of Afghan craftsmen and funds from the Aga Khan Trust for Culture and about $2.4 million from the US and German governments. Inside the citadel, the National Museum of Herat is already attracting local tourists.
هدف ما بوده که اشخاصی که در گذشته در افغانستان بوده چی فعالیت‌های کرده، چی آثاری ساخته و چطور اشخاصی بوده.
The manager of the museum says its exhibitions of ancient weapons and glimpses into Afghanistan's long and varied history has become so popular they need to extend their opening hours.
ما روزانه 100-150-200 نفر از اینجا بازدید کننده داشتیم با اینکه وقت ما هم طبق پروگرام دولتی هسته اگر ما در تصمیم داریم که با آینده وقت خود را هم بیشتر در اینجا داشته باشیم وقت زیادتری داشته باشیم چون وقتی که وقت پروگرام دولتی وقت کمی هست و در این فرصت برای مردم میسر نمیشه که بیان همه دیدن بنماید.
He said there the numbers were at about 150. They're up in the thousands today. The United States government, taxpayers, paid $1 million for this project. That's, again, a reminder, the price of one soldier or Marine spending 1 year in Afghanistan. Another example, music. You recall when the Taliban did gain control of the country in the mid-1990s that they immediately banned the playing of music throughout the country. This prohibition was lifted with the liberation of the country in late 2001, 2002. When I served as our chief of mission in Afghanistan in 2009, I did become acquainted with the Afghan National Institute of Music in Kabul. It's an Afghan fine arts school established in 2006, and it's dedicated to the musical education of Afghan children, including many of them economically disadvantaged. The children are taught both Western orchestral and traditional Afghan music, and most are incredibly skilled at both. Indeed, one of the most accomplished violinists at the Institute was a young girl named Marja, who previously walked the streets of Kabul selling gum and was admitted to the Institute by the American director when he saw her each day standing with her face pressed against the window, transfixed by the students practicing their lessons. 5 years later, now Marja has applied for admission to the Juilliard School. The Institute in February of last year had a crowning achievement when it sent its student orchestra to perform at Carnegie Hall in New York City and the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. I was invited to attend a sold-out concert at the Kennedy Center, and I have to tell you, I've never sat through a more uplifting and emotional event. It was well attended by many Afghan citizens as well as Afghan American citizens, and it was during the course of this repertoire that was being performed that those in the audience were witnessing the rise of the Afghan cultural phoenix coming out of the ashes of many decades of warfare. So watch this event now, a video of the Afghan National Institute of Music students joined by an American student orchestra, and they're performing at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., February the 7th, 2013. Victor Hugo wrote that music expresses the truth, expresses which cannot be said and which it is impossible to remain silent. And I believe that his words were validated that night at the Kennedy Center. Well, no one in the audience on that evening could predict in the near term, in the years ahead, the future of Afghanistan. What everyone could agree with is that just as those youthful Afghan musicians that winter evening demonstrated they could excel on a world-class musical stage, there was no reason that the Afghan nation could not one day claim a place of dignity and respect on the world diplomatic stage. A reminder on cost: U.S. Embassy, taxpayers, $500,000 for the Afghan National Institute of Music. That's 6 months of one soldier or Marine's deployment to Afghanistan. Now, before joining Jerome, a final message to everyone here in attendance. In the 1989 cinema classic, Field of Dreams, there's Farmer Ray Kinsella, who you recall played by Kevin Costner. He achieves success by listening to that inner voice that he keeps hearing, and it whispers to him, if you build it, he will come. Now, I have to say, I don't think this is necessarily, though, a winning strategy in this year of 2014 to inspire the younger generation to study the arts and humanities. Sitting in one's arts and humanities classroom, worrying about declining enrollments, cursing the STEM god, might be good grist for Shakespearean tragedy, but it does little to help the cause. You have to get outside of the box, and you have to compete for market share. My third and last short video clip is from Colbert Nation, August the 15th, 2013, and it features who Jonathan already mentioned, President of Duke University, Dick Broadhead.
Obviously, you know, you're a humanities guy, and so you think we should have the humanities in our lives. But if you were not the president of Duke, but instead were perhaps the president of a technical training institute, wouldn't you be talking about the ineffable beauty of draining Freon from an AC unit?
Well, I'll tell you. This commission that I co-chaired had on it some presidents of universities, it had on it some scholars, but it also had the CEO of Boeing, it had the former governor of Tennessee was a member on it, it had the person who heads the largest community college in America, and all of them argued for the long-term value of the kind of things that the humanities teaches. All of them did. I'll tell you something that especially interesting. The former president of MIT, who's now the head of the National Academy of Engineers, was on our committee. You know, he says engineers need to do more than engineering. They need to be able to communicate in order for the full value of their education to come across.
Now, look, for me personally, taking on the Taliban was a much less daunting task than facing Stephen Colbert on Colbert Nation. But to use a military parlance for a moment here, we do need to suck it up, so to speak, and go on the offensive. We have to go to where the target audiences are, and we have to engage them on their home turf. I know this can be very hard and uncomfortable work. However, I do remember seeing on the office desk of one of our many stellar embassy performers in Afghanistan a sign that she said served as her daily inspiration in the conduct of her very difficult assignment. I'd encourage you to get outside of your own comfort zones, take risk, and remember that not only is the X-File adage, the truth is out there, operative, but that those in the younger generation who need to be introduced to and inspired by the arts and humanities, like the truth, they're out there also. So thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation with Jerome and with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jerome McDonnell. I host Worldview at WBEZ. Nice to see you. You know, I think a lot of people think about this push for the humanities as something that's happening in response to what's been the emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math. That really, those guys have been out there screaming their bloody heads off for money and funding and space in our academies, and they've been winning. There was a graph in the report, that a little pie chart about who gets the funding from the federal government, and it was not the humanities. While the STEM guys were getting like 70% of the funding, the humanity guys were getting 20% from the federal government. This report is the pushback?
I think Dick Broadhead is the president of Duke. He had expressed this very well, that this should not be a either-or kind of proposition. First of all, though, in questions of scale, if you look at the National Endowment of Humanities compared to federally funded research for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, 0.55% for the arts and humanities compared to the so-called STEM. So
yeah, I went and looked it up, and it's their whole budget's $150 million.
Yeah, we're talking
nothing.
We're talking small amounts of money. Having said that, though, that amount of money, if I could just give a number or two here, cabinet-level agencies, fiscal year 2008, Foreign Language Assistance Program, $30 million. Fiscal year 2015 request, $0. Teaching of American History, Department of Education, 2008, $130 million. 2015, $0. Department of State, Fulbright Program, 2008, $240 million. Fiscal year 2015 requests, $204 million. So yeah, numbers coming down. Numbers are part of what has to be addressed, and I think the Academy and the Commission are working hard at that at the federal level. Jonathan, you introduced the senators and members of the House that are actively engaged. There's actually, in the Senate and the House, there's a humanities caucus that's there. And the Academy does a good job of working with them. There is actually a bill that may be introduced to take one of the Academy recommendations, the creation of a master teaching corps, and actually put that into legislation. That would be very helpful. There's talk about the Congress then turning back to the Commission and the Academy and asking them to undertake a study on foreign languages and the need. So part of this is the work at the federal level that has to be done, but it's not all about money. The Academy is also working very hard at state level. Jonathan mentioned all of these events that are going on. Let me give you an example there. The Carnegie Mellon University, Subra Suresh, I think known to many people here.
Oops, you knocked it onto your lap.
Does anybody have a science or engineering background here? Subra Suresh is the president of Carnegie Mellon University, also headed the National Science Foundation. President Suresh hosted, as the president of Carnegie Mellon, heavy into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, a Heart of the Matter event. And we've learned that as a result of that, they have relooked at their curriculum, and Subra is a huge advocate of the arts and humanities, using that as leverage then to make the curriculum more appropriate. And third is that what this Academy and the Commission has done is through all of this activism at state level, at local level, we're helping to create awareness, but also powerful networks between the local community as they come together and the state and the federal. So it's a full court press that has to continue, but ensuring that as a starting point, we don't make this an either or. Both are needed.
When you're making the argument for the humanities, how do you say it pays off? Because all these STEM guys are out there and they say, well, we are going to for sure fall behind in the interwebs and everything, and we're going to be in dark shape if we don't keep our edge in technology. And how do you say, well, where are we going to be competitiveness-wise if we lose our edge in the humanities?
Well, it's interesting, Jerome, when you get out and talk to the captains of industry and you talk to our cutting-edge companies, that what you'll find out from the leaders of those organizations is that they highly value those that have an arts and humanities background. 2 examples. If in the Heart of the Matter report, there's a survey, results are shown, of leaders of industry or business. 75% of business leaders in our country say that the most important skill that they have is not what necessarily the degree is, but their analytical abilities, their abilities to communicate, to write. That's at the center of the arts and humanities. Example number 2 that I'd like to give is just a recent one. I'm at Stanford University, so a lot of time with leaders from Silicon Valley. I went to LinkedIn recently and talked to one of their very senior executives. So now out and about a lot, talking about the arts and humanities, I always ask the question when I'm with industry, what does the arts and humanities mean to you? So I asked this senior executive, at LinkedIn, if you look at, say, your top 10 leaders, what's their education background? And it was extraordinary. First, he said, well, mine is English literature, Stanford undergrad. He went on to get engineering degrees, but I'm probably not a very good example. Then, as he reflected, it was stunning. He said, well, we've got this top individual, and let me think, yeah, Oxford, master's in philosophy. He said, then there's this individual, a major in music, Stanford University. Another undergraduate, a major in dance, and on it went. So I think what we know, but has to be communicated better, and we know in this audience, but has to be communicated better, is that the idea that you have the hard sciences, but when you get to the question of creativity, innovation, just the essence of business, business is about delivering products to people. And that's where the arts and humanities comes in as a source of inspiration, but also a communication bridge.
You know, when we were talking about this before the event, I mentioned that I read in The Bicycle Diaries, a book by David Byrne, where he takes a trip on bicycle through many different cities, and he talks about what makes them work development-wise and why some cities seem better than others, and he talks about the creativity in San Francisco there, and he talks about how he thinks there's a connection between the 60s, and he writes that the 60s in San Francisco produced psychedelic rock, underground comics, psychedelic posters, the Whole Earth catalog, B-Ins, the anarchic camp spectaculars created by the Cockettes, a legendary drag musical theater group. And he goes on to say, to imply that there's a link between the Cockettes and the dot-com world might seem a stretch to some, but the underlying theme of revolution for the hell of it runs straight through all of them. He sees a big connection between the creative explosion in San Francisco and LinkedIn.
Now, to be frank here, I didn't have any of that crew on my embassy team in Afghanistan. But the point's a powerful one. There's a book that was written by, I think it was published 2 or 3 years ago by Scott Page. And I didn't know Scott Page before I picked that book up, but it's called The Difference. And Scott, in very understandable terms, but very rigorous, talks about how having teams that are diverse, not ethnically diverse, not skin diverse, not necessarily male, female, although that can matter. He's talking about frames of thinking about problems and getting where you have complex problems, the need to have diversity around the table. It's a lesson that was a very powerful one for me as well as the ambassador in Afghanistan, as we had this diverse team sitting around the table looking at some really hard problems in Afghanistan, to include somebody from the Treasury Department that thinks finance, the archaeology expert, commerce, all of these different members of the team looking at the problem in different ways. I have to tell you, Jerome, that then when I look back on my military experience, I, in a very important way, saw the power of intellectual diversity.
You know, the report goes through a lot of things that can be done for grade school children, that it goes right up the line to college, and that there's some scary things in the report about, you know, us reading less to our children than we used to, there's a real ground level push that has to be made across the board, and it recommends a cultural core to go out there and create people who are out there, you know, really drumming it up for the humanities and for doing it yourself.
Yeah, I think that one of the most worrisome parts of the report, it gave a lot of indicators of where we stand right now as a nation. I think one of the indicators was that 25% now of our 8th to 12th graders are passing what's considered the standard when it comes to writing, reading, and communication skills. And that's a low number. But as you're saying, Jerome, to address this, it has to be a very comprehensive approach. Yeah, reading inside the home, that matters. Efforts made at the federal level, they matter as well. But what the stakes are, you know, I tend to be out talking from my background, so I talk about why it's important for America's competitiveness abroad. It's important for our economy. But it's also, let's be clear, it's important for our democracy, which is our way of life. We have troubles, and we've always had troubles with this democracy, but it's a pretty good way of organizing. There's Stanford graduate Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court. And Anthony Kennedy has made the point when we talk about democracy, that's not something when our children are born or when somebody comes to our country, it's not in their DNA. Democracy is something which has to be understood, it has to be defended, it has to be transmitted, it has to be preserved. And to make an assumption that that is in our DNA is something that could be a real fatal flaw in our system. So I think we have to change that. It's about democracy, it's about and our way of governing, it's about our economy, it's about our security, and then never mind, those are all instrumental arguments. And then it's also about teaching our younger generation to come to grips with questions of how do they look at life, how do they interpret love, how do they face death. That's not something that can be taught in science. It's something that only the arts and humanities can address.
Let's talk about your background a little bit, because when I was going over your CV, you never stopped learning. You kept getting degrees. And you started out at West Point. You had a curiosity in China. What was going on? How did you went and you spoke fluent Mandarin?
Well, how I started down that path was contingency, like so many of our choices in life. And you look at CVs and you say, well, this was all predestined. But the fact is, when I was a senior in Goldsboro High School, North Carolina, I'd been accepted to the military academy. I got a letter from the Department of Foreign Languages and said, Mr. Eikenberry, you'll have to spend 2 of your 4 years at the academy studying a foreign language. And so I looked over the list, and I was studying French in Goldsboro High. I said, well, French, boring. I know that one. I've mastered that with 2 years of high school French. And German, a little bit more exciting. Russian, very exciting. And then I saw Mandarin Chinese, and my parents had about 6 months ago driven over to Raleigh, North Carolina, and we ate at the one Chinese restaurant in Raleigh. So I said, this is it. And that's how choices get made. Now, I was brought up in an environment in a serious way in Goldsboro High. I was blessed. I had, as I look back, a group of teachers there that weren't going to go on to be university professors, but they had a love of the arts and humanities. So there was a kind of inspiration even in those days. A second point about the study of Chinese, again, to convey to everyone here this mission that we all have in believing the arts and humanities, of trying to take this to the next generation. After 2 years at West Point, I was doing well in Mandarin Chinese, but I walked in to tell one of the few civilian instructors we had in those days, Professor Jason Zhang. I said, Professor Zhang, I'm not going to continue my Chinese studies. Next year, a lot of STEM. We had engineering, math, and I said, I'm interested in keeping my grades high. I have to really spend a lot of time on Mandarin Chinese. And he said, Mr. Eikenberry, the Chinese club is going to Taiwan, Republic of China in those days. This summer, I want you to go. And I said, Professor Jog, I can't take a slot. I'm not going to continue to study Chinese. And he said, Mr. Eikenberry, I will give you a position. There's no pressure on you. I said, okay, fine. So off I went to Taiwan that summer, and Taiwan night market, studying at the State Department School in Kaohsiung. I'm 19 years old. Fly over to Jinmena Island during the Cultural Revolution, looking at the mainland. And I came back, and the first stop I made at West Point to Professor Zhang's office and said, Professor Zhang, sign me up for 2 more years. So that role that we all play of mentors out there, I think, is an important one.
How do you foster that? How do you create more mentors that did what happened to you?
Well, I think part of it is going back to Dick Broadhead out there. First of all, you've got to get out there and go to where the audience are. Right now, I'm worried because the audiences are decreasing inside the arts and humanities classrooms. At Stanford University, I just learned that we have 7% of the next class coming, graduating at Stanford, 7% arts and humanities majors, 14% of course enrollments, arts and humanities. If you compare that to 40, 50 years ago, that's a sea change that's out there. So you're not going to...
And Stanford's a pretty good school. There's a lot of state institutions out there that have been more aggressive than that.
There's a lot of state schools that would get back to budgets and funding. They're hurting in the arts and humanities, Jerome. So finding a way to be creative in terms of how you portray the arts and humanities, I think, is essential. That doesn't begin at Stanford. It begins in K through 12. Let's say we're talking about history. Well, if I'd ask everyone to raise their hand, if you've heard of Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War, most hands would go up. Well, why in K through 12, hopefully we're talking about the rise of China, the United States, why can't we in K through 12 or universities have professors that are talking about the study of Greek and Roman history and culture, take Thucydides and say, now we're going to, with Thucydides in that study, let's see what Thucydides might have said about the competition between China and the United States. So be creative, get outside of the comfort zone, be seen, and also talk to your young students about the need to find mentors in life. Mentors in life are different from networks that are created. Mentors are on a short list of people that you know throughout your life, and you try to use that person's wisdom or the example as a life example. But again, the younger generation, I believe, needs to be taught even that much about the role of mentors and picking the right people.
What happened in the military? How did your background in the humanities help you lead people in the U.S. military?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I could give 2 examples there about what the arts and humanities meant to me as a military commander. Number 1 is that when you're a military commander and you're in combat or you're about to lead a group of people into harm's way, it's very easy to conclude that this is unique. No one's ever been in this difficult situation before. But if you've studied military history, then you will recall, as things are getting very difficult, that there's been many people before you, a Grant at Vicksburg or a Xenophon getting ready to lead the march of 10,000 up country. There's been many, many before you that have been in far more difficult situations, and they've managed to get through it. I learned that from a professor of military history at West Point, another civilian professor. Second, warfare can be a pretty ugly business. Things go wrong. human beings are human beings subjected to all kinds of extraordinary pressure, and the need to try to find ways with your leaders, whether these are officers or sergeants, to instill in them the sense of ethics with no right or wrong answer, but to have an ethical context. So certainly with officers of the military, you'd be surprised that there might be readings with officers at cadets at West Point or leadership seminars where you talk about Henry V from Shakespeare. So it's taken for granted that a military officer within his or her domain of infantry, tanks, whatever, will be skilled into being able to fight technically and doctrinally combat. But underpinning that is the ethical dimension. And that also, as I look at my own background with the arts and humanities, has served me very well, and it serves our military well.
It seems like the humanities are geared toward making us, towards our common humanity. We all have certain things that certain values and things that are common to all of humanity. And how do you bring, when you're in the Army, and the Army seems to, you're going to fight the other guy, and the other guy is a bad guy, and it seems like the whole mission is to deprive the other, to not have humanity on the other side, but have some kind of evil that is unfathomable in order to go fight them. How do you bridge the gap there?
Well, if you look at the essence of combat, short of warfare, short of total war, Clausewitz, the very famous German strategist, had articulated and penned that warfare is a continuation of politics by other means. Well, the point there is that warfare and conflict doesn't end with the last enemy soldier killed. We're working on a continuum, and it ends with a political solution. So first of all, I'd argue that if we're talking just in the sense of who is the adversary, understanding the adversary's thinking, understanding their culture, their value system, what do they find as the incentives, what does they find as the disincentives. If you're a military commander advising political authorities about the application of military power, you need to understand that if you're going to make the best advice. But beyond that, Jerome, we frequently, when we send military forces abroad, of course, we're operating in a sea of humanity. So as our forces were sent into Afghanistan, well, the people of Afghanistan, they're trying to make a judgment about which way will their future go. Is Taliban going to emerge as the victor? Is there going to be a progressive government or some kind of new government which will emerge? And our forces then are operating within that sea of humanity. And it's essential that we have a cadre of leaders, and to the best we can at the grassroots level, try to get soldiers and Marines who have an appreciation of culture, the country's history, their society, their politics. All of that is important.
And when you were moved over to the diplomatic side, what were the really effective ways you were able to use the humanities to bridge, build, and to create a better Afghanistan?
Yeah, I gave several examples there. We worked hard. I talked about our embassy archaeologist. She was Laura Tedesco. She was just superb. There was that program, a small grant that got the Kabul Museum up and running again. Another grant that helped Afghan archaeologists associated with the museum that were excavating an ancient site southeast of Kabul and in the Ainak area. And anybody who knows the history of South Asia would know in about 300, 400 BC, AD, there was a great Buddhist kingdom that stretched from the Indus River all the way up to the Kabul River. And so there was excavation of that going. Well, what was important with that? It's the Afghans reclaiming their culture, but then after these years of Taliban influence, they're starting to see a history that goes way back that they're very proud of, much more inclusive, much more tolerant. We worked in the area of music. We worked heavy in education, and I could go on. It's quite a long list, but in every instance, the amount of cost and capital that we put in was so modest.
How about the media? Did you have any fun with the media?
Oh, we did. I'm glad you, Jerome, I'm glad you raised that. I guess that reflects your background there. We worked very hard with the media, candidly needing to be a little bit sensitive, because there would always be, rightfully, if looked at from a distance, are they trying to, is the United States government trying to create certain messages within the Afghan media? And we stayed away from this. What we did do is we looked hard at what the media might be able to do for the Afghan people if television networks were to start, radio networks were to start, and have more progressive kind of programming. And we worked beginning in 2002, 2003 to explore possibilities. Well, let me tell you what those possibilities were then and how they played out. By the year 2012, 17 television networks in Afghanistan. Without those television networks, as weak as political institutions are in the country right now, there would be no representative government of Afghanistan. 50 radio networks around the country. Well, what kind of shows did they have on? One that I was particularly proud of, there was a lot of shows that were talking about women's rights in Afghanistan, talking about the role of women in the economy of Afghanistan. Very well received. In fact, my wife was with me on when I was the ambassador. She became more or less our ambassador to Afghan women, and she was invited in 2011 to be a judge on Afghan Iron Chef. And you know, sitting here, you can't imagine the Afghan Iron Chef. It's there, a very popular show. And there was a five-star male chef from Kabul who was he was the real Iron Chef, great reputation. And his challenger was a woman from Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan, housewife. She had seen Iron Chef, and her family thought her cooking was awesome, and said, "You need to get down to Kabul and take on the champion," which she did. And my wife was there as one of the judges for that. So the media plays...
She had to vote for the woman then.
She never told me.
Man, you people are ethical, I am telling you.
So, yeah, the media plays a very important role politically, but I also in the sense of advancing social consciousness. There's this question of the law, and there's convention. And what the media did is push forward changes in convention.
You know, I've been talking with the folks from the Academy here, and they say you're out there pushing this harder than almost anybody on the commission. Why are you doing it?
I hope I don't, truly, I hope I don't sound corny with this. President Obama, when he announced the troop surge at West Point, New York, the United States Military Academy on the 1st of December, 2009. I was back in the United States at that time from Kabul, and he had a line in the, if you'll go back and look at his speech, which was very thoughtful, and he was saying, we're going to limit the amount of time that we're going to put these surge forces in, but we need to change the conditions on the ground right now. And he said that I'm going to limit the amount of time that those surge forces are in Afghanistan because I don't want to start to go into real expensive nation building. He said, if there's any one nation I want to do nation building in, it's the United States of America. And when I read and listened to that part of the speech, it resonated with me and my wife. We've spent a lot of years overseas. We had spent a lot of years overseas working in some tough places. And what we decided is that what would be a good post-government, post-military is see if we could make any contribution, so to speak, to nation building on the home front, or let me say society building. So it's deep within me, and I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities in education over the course of a military career and briefer diplomatic career to see a lot. But I'm hoping to draw from those experiences and make arguments why it is important to our own nation if we're going to have a good future.
Yay, Ambassador Karl Eikenberry. We're going to take some questions. We've got time for a few questions. We have a microphone right out here.
Thank you, Ambassador. You gave some very inspirational examples of soft power with those wonderful musicians and the television stations and education for girls. Are you not concerned that with the departure of American and other Western forces that all the Taliban may resurge and all that will go away?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's you know, getting away from the arts and humanities, but if it's okay with everyone here, I'll take a swing at that one. Yeah, I am concerned. Afghanistan is not the country that it was in 2001. Look, has there been money that's been inefficiently spent in Afghanistan? Have we made mistakes? Have the Afghans made mistakes? Has the international community made mistakes in Afghanistan? Of course. But the steady drumbeat of failure in Afghanistan, it doesn't bear up to realities that are on the ground. When I first went into Afghanistan in 2002, there was 1 million children that were in school. Today, there's 7.8 million in school. In 2002, of that 1 million, there were very few girls in school. Now, of that number of 7.2 million, 40% of those students are girls. There were this many universities open, except Kabul University, in 2002. Now there's about 40 universities in Afghanistan that are open. I could go through indices of health, broader indices of education. I could take a look, I could talk about the Afghan National Army, which really is a national army with a lot of deficiencies. So Afghanistan has really come a long, long ways. The problem is we don't know the answer to the question, is it sustainable? With no U.S. assistance, military and development assistance, it will not be sustainable. Nor, however, is Afghanistan at a point today where it still needs 100,000 Marines and Army on the ground. Nor do they need or can they effectively use the massive amounts, maybe too much development assistance that was flowing into that country at the height of the surge years. What I would say is that there's some level of security and military assistance, and there's some level of external development assistance that Afghanistan is going to need in order to avoid collapsing back into a civil war. I think the numbers the President is talking about right now may be adequate. It may be a little bit below. Maybe we'll be surprised and less can be done and the country can hold together. Why do I say, though, it's a material level of assistance? You'd be asking the question, well, what about the politics? Why is the material level? It's because when you talk about the politics of Afghanistan are defined by, first of all, there's no ethnic group of Afghanistan that wants to break away. It's not Iraq. The Afghan people are surprisingly nationalistic. Now, each ethnic group has a very different idea about who should be the leader within the state, but they all agree of inclusion. So you don't have centrifugal forces. Secondly, there has been so much progress that's been made, especially in the urban areas of Afghanistan, that you can say that the middle ground of civil society, which everyone here knows a lot about, are starting to emerge. And I don't think it's possible for the extremist, unless there's chaos because of loss of security capability and external development assistance, I don't think it's possible for the extremists to come in and push the Afghans off that middle ground of civil society. Third, and very importantly, when you talk about the Afghan people and their leaders behind closed doors, well, what have those older leaders experienced? They've experienced Soviet occupation, brutality of civil war, and the Taliban. My sense is that as they, behind closed doors, are trying to make a deal, and somebody gets ready to stand up and say, I'm walking out, and I'm going back, and I'm going to tell my people to raise militias, that other people in the room say, sit back down, we remember the bad times. So we have a possibility for a success in Afghanistan that certainly eluded us in Iraq.
Ambassador, how would you characterize the kind of media coverage we're getting these days about Afghanistan? I certainly haven't had any indication of the kind of statistics you gave us about the schools and the students and the universities. Are we getting any kind of a story or even approaching a full story?
Let me say, make 2 points on the media. First of all, if I look back over a military career, and I talked about how brutal things can get, that the media, as hard as it was as a commander to work with the media, I became more and more insistent that we get the media out everywhere. Warfare can be pretty ugly business. The more lights that we've got, people poking around with lights out there, that's good for the United States of America. That's good for our armed forces. That said, when you're, if I'm media of the New York Times in Kabul, and I'm thinking about how do I get a story to my editor that he'll publish, look, you're not going to get a New York Times headlines saying, breaking news, elementary school in Konar province opened today. I can get a headline if I've got some bad news, and there's a lot of bad news out there. I got bad news about narcotics. I have bad news about Taliban attacks. I've got bad news about corruption. So you've got the media, which of course looks at the snapshot, and they want to look at the picture. I understand that. How do you go beyond that and then talk about the movie called Afghanistan, which begins back with bin Laden operating out of Afghanistan, planning the attack of 9/11, the Buddhas being blown up in Bamiyan Valley by the Taliban, to today, and some of those macro statistics that I offered. So when I went into Afghanistan as a major general the first time, I was told by an Afghan that line, remember when you're going in that there's a picture called Afghanistan and frequently it will not be good, and there's a movie called Afghanistan which might be inspirational. And I don't know how we work our way through this in terms of trying to tell stories.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Have you considered the idea of convincing universities to put their humanities and science departments closer together physically?
You've actually raised, I think, a very important question here, and a way ahead. That I'll give you an example at Stanford University right now, the arts and humanities study. What Stanford is doing more of right now is looking at double majors, and then you have a combined major. So you might have a combined major in history and in computer science, where you're looking then at the STEM side, and you're looking at the arts and humanities side, and you're trying to blend these, which get back to the question of how do you excite creativity and innovation in the hard sciences. So I don't have a great campaign to explain to you underway right now. This gets, I think, more into the area of local initiative, university college initiatives, but I think that is a promising way forward.
Yay, thanks, Karl Eikenberry.